After victory in the recent constitutional referendum, Turkish President Recep Erdogan is stronger than ever before. However, the EU launched an investigation into its transparency and expressed pessimism about the result. What impact will this have on EU-Turkey relations? The EU Council is not renewing negotiations with Turkey based on concerns about undemocratic government and a potential reinstatement of the death penalty. And recently, President Erdogan suggested Turkey should say goodbye to the EU. So where does Turkey's potential EU membership stand now? Relations between Russia and Turkey changed dramatically recently. What will happen if Turkey continues to strengthen ties with Russia instead of the EU? In this selection year, current leaders of major European countries are seriously challenged by populism and right-wing opponents, and could be affected by the policies of Turkey on immigrants. How will this issue eventually be resolved?
The recent constitutional referendum in Turkey has provided President Erdogan with a path to unprecedented power. Turkey's EU membership negotiations are currently at a standstill, and Brussels says it sees no immediate prospect of EU membership, given what it considers to be a less democratic Turkey, which is planning to bring back the death penalty. But Turkey's strategic importance to the West and to the limitation of the flow of refugees to Europe continues to color the politics surrounding Turkey and Europe. To discuss the future of Turkey-EU relationship, I am so happy to be joined in the studio in Beijing by Hua Liming, former Chinese ambassador to Iran, and Yasa Yakis, former foreign minister of Turkey. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Mr. Foreign Minister, your newly elected President, Mr. Erdogan, urged the EU to reconsider opening up the negotiations for the membership of EU in favor of Turkey, and threatened to beat retreat if their demand was turned down. Now, what does that mean? Is it kind of a very serious bargaining process to begin with?
Actually, President Erdogan may be doing it for bargaining process, but when you look at it from the European Union side, they are more focused on the criteria that Turkey should abide by to fulfill. Turkey should fulfill, and without fulfilling these criteria, I don't expect that they will move.
What are those important criteria that are considered the threshold that Turkey must cross?
Actually, there are 34 chapters, and there are 10,000 page voluminous
tons of questions to be answered.
Questions to answer, but on the question, especially for the reopening or resuming the suspended negotiations, Turkey needed to fulfill 72 criteria, and 67 of them were already fulfilled. There were 5 criteria remaining, and among them was the amendment to be brought to the law, to the legislation on terror. Turkey said that it is fighting with the PKK terrorist organization, and a war is being unfolded in the neighboring countries. So under these circumstances, Turkey cannot easily change the legislation on terror. Whereas, in my opinion, what the European Union asked was not to create a ground where you cannot fight terrorism. What they wanted to do is that you should not put in the same basket an academician who signed a petition or a statement criticizing the present situation in various on the question of fundamental rights and freedom, to put such a man, an academician, in the same basket with a man who has gun in his hand and who is committing terrorist crimes. So Turkey had to make this distinction between what is terror and what is not. Normally, in
excuse me, that's one of the most difficult issues to address. concerning definition of terrorism. In fact, I had a very nice conversation with an Israeli professor at the State Center of Counterterrorism in Tel Aviv, and we had a very deep discussion about the definition. In fact, we somehow disagree. Well, Ambassador Hua, what do you think are the obstacles that Turkey is facing in having the eventual membership of the European Union?
I think all these the criteria the European Union has put for Turkey, just nothing but an excuse. Look, after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, more than 10 European countries has been accepted as member of the European Union. Did all these 10 members, they have fulfilled the criteria as Turkey asked? Turkey has been applied for membership for more than 6 decades, but all criteria.
Unbelievable.
I think that it's nothing but an excuse to block the way.
Are you suggesting that there is a double standard concerning accepting Turkey as a member of the EU? That reminds me of what happened before President Trump wins the election. The Obama administration rejected China's participation in the TPP, although China was reluctant to join it, while they accepted Vietnam. Now, compared, with Hanoi, China is, of course, in a better position to be accepted as a full-fledged member of the TPP. So, do you agree, Mr. Foreign Minister, that
yes,
there is such a thing like a double standard, and you feel badly treated?
Definitely, yes. Turkey is very badly treated, and unequal treatment was extended to Turkey because of its size, because of different culture, Islamic, a country predominantly with predominantly Muslim population. All these things are there, and there are prejudices based from the history, because Turkey, the Ottoman Turks, were the ones who brought the banner of Islam to the heart of Europe in the past. So all these things have played their role in their attitude. That's correct. But Turkey could do also. Well, when we were established, I am one of the founding members of the ruling party, and when we were establishing the party, the criteria that I drafted at that time was that we should fulfill all the criteria that the other countries have fulfilled and not give the European Union an excuse to reject Turkey's membership. This is what Turkey should be doing. Turkey has done a lot of them, but there are also some missing points, and it should do, and then knock the door.
Well, of course, there are more stories to be told concerning the long journey before you are accepted. Ambassador Hua, I know it's difficult for Chinese diplomats or commentators to look at domestic politics of Turkey, but many things have taken place over the past 1 or 2 years inside Turkey. Look at the coup, the failed coup, and the recent referendum that resulted in sweeping powers of the presidency. These things have been very controversial for Americans and Europeans. Do you think they have also contributed to the indecision and the inaction of the European Union to accept Turkey?
Of course, after this constitutional referendum, Turkey has been looked by the Europeans or even some Americans as less democratic because Erdogan, according to the new constitution, the president will be the main decision maker of this country, and the system or the model established by Kemal Atatürk 100 years before is going to change. So that's why the Europeans and Americans, they dislike the change, the referendum. And they looked at some historical changes will happen. And the model that Kemal Atatürk has established in Turkey will change. This is the problem for Europeans and Americans.
Why the Europeans have been so sensitive about a constitutional change or amendment that were first introduced by Mr. Kemal at the beginning of last century?
Actually, the secularism is a valued principle or criteria in the Western democracy. And Turkey, before the Kemal Atatürk, Kemalist Turkey, Republican Turkey, it was the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman sultans were at the same time Khalif of Islamic Ummah. That's to say, the Pope, the role played by the Pope in the Christian world, or at least its Catholic world, was played by the Ottoman sultans. It has such a big authority. And Kemal Atatürk established a republic which was based on secular principle. And secularism is a valued criteria in the Western countries. This was one of them. And Turkey adopted also or abolished the Sharia, so law based on religion, and it replaced it with the secular laws, which is appealing to the Western countries. The more you put into force, you put into implementation the criteria used by the Western countries, the more you are like them, so they will appreciate more. This might be one.
Mr. Foreign Minister, you know, I have been left puzzled by your mention of Western countries as if you are not part of the West. Look at Turkey. You are the country that connects Asia with Europe. I went to the Bosporus Street and I was impressed by the beautiful scenery there and also history of this fantastic city. So this is question number one. Number two is, what do you think of the role of the Turkish military? Over the past decade or so, so many generals, officers and soldiers have been arrested on charges of launching coup. And the latest one, of course, failed with so much bloodshed. It's a tragedy for a country, and it's a very controversial story to follow by the rest of the world. You are watching Dialogue with Ambassador Hua Limin and former Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mr. Yasir Yakis. We're discussing politics in Turkey as well as why it's been so difficult for Turkey to be accepted as a member of the European Union. What are the key criteria that are being cited by the European Union to accept Turkey? When we come back, we'll take a closer look. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Mr. Foreign Minister, question number one. Do you consider Turkey as part of the West, or you are just Asia or non-Western country?
No, Turkey is Western country, Balkan country, Middle Eastern country, part of the Islamic world, part of the Mediterranean country. So Turkey has a multiple identity. And
is that a curse or blessing for the future of Turkey?
It is both blessing and the curse, and it depends on how you use it. If you play your cards, your different identity, multiple identity.
Now you are able to keep a distance from center of Turkish politics. Can you make some comments on presidency of Mr. Erdogan? Because you said wisely that it depends on whether the ruling party or the paramount leader will be able to use the multiple facets or features of your location, geopolitical history. What's your answer?
He may use it, he may not. Of course, it is uncertain because politics is a question of subjectivity. It's subjective. It varies from one person to another. But one thing is important, that the presidential system in general should not be blamed as a system. It is the person who becomes president that counts. So there are in the history presidents who had extensive powers and who used these powers in such a manner, perhaps sometimes in the dictatorial manner, but he took the right decisions and implemented in a dictatorial manner, and he saved his country, led his country to better future.
Taking Turkey as an example, Ambassador Hua, are there any serious differences between a dictator and a charismatic, popular strongman in Turkish politics?
I think after this constitutional amendment, President Erdogan certainly he will have much more power than he used to be. Because according to the old constitution of the Turkey, prime minister is the man who has the power, political power. President was just a ceremonial one. Now after the amendments, he will become the real powerful man in this country.
The issue is
but I don't agree that he will become, just by this amendment, he will become a dictator.
The issue, gentlemen, is whether his presidential powers will be regulated, will be checked and balanced effectively by the current mechanism or institutions that are constitutionally guaranteed in your country, Mr. Prime Minister.
Actually, Turkey does not have the traditions of checks and balances.
But you have a powerful military, which was authorized by your founding father, Mr. Kemal, to play the role of a watchdog.
Yes.
To protect the constitution, to protect the idea of secularism. Now, with the massive arrests of so many senior officers, do you think the role of the military has been seriously undermined? And is it legal to undermine the role of the military?
Actually, it is undermined, but it happened in such a manner that now those who put the generals in jail are being tried by other tribunals, by other courts, for having put these generals in jail. So,
this is indeed very complicated.
It is very complicated. So, to a certain extent, the prestige of the army is being restored by putting in jail those who have jailed the generals, and also the government washed its hands, saying that it was not done by us, but it was done by another mechanism. So whether the generals or army in general will reach the same level of influence as compared to the pre-trial period, we do not know. It may not happen because it is shaken to such an extent that it may not be entirely restored, but it will be curtailed to a certain extent.
Ambassador Hua, do you believe the European Union in particular has been seriously concerned, if not dissatisfied and upset by the house cleaning campaign of Mr. Erdogan following the failed coup? Thousands of teachers, scholars, journalists, army men, policemen were arrested on charges of being involved in the coup. And Mr. Gulen was urged by President Erdogan to be brought back, to be repatriated back as a public enemy number one of the fugitive. So what do you think of the campaign?
Of course, I think that most of the Europeans, they dislike President Erdogan because of 2 points. One thing is just the values. What President Erdogan has or is something opposite to to European
universal values that are held so dear by
death
Westerners.
penalty and the freedom of the parties and freedom of press. The second thing is that after the political change inside Turkey, President Erdogan has much more close relationship with Russia. This is what the Europeans are concerned about, because this is a geopolitical reason.
But I'm afraid politicians of the far-right movement in France, for example, said loud and clear they would put an end to the economic sanctions against Russia were they able to win the election. It means there is a strong sentiment shared by many members of the far-right political forces to show their sympathy with the Russians and to mend ties with Moscow. Ambassador Hua was talking about the values. Do you think values are the issue that get in the way?
Values actually are used as a pretext rather than the real issue, because the Western countries or members of the European Union have gathered around a set of values and rules, and they use it for good reasons, as any country would do, to their advantage. And when, as ambassador was saying, they use one criteria for Turkey. If you ask the same criteria, either on religious basis or non-religious political basis, they will ignore it. This happens in every country's case.
There must be the issue of mistrust, deep-rooted mistrust between the two sides, the European Union and Turkey. Now, since you have retired from the posting of a foreign minister, can you be frank and honest about this issue? Do you actually trust Russians?
Actually, the countries do not need to have full confidence in other countries. They have to come together and cooperate in areas where their interests are converging. So there is no permanent friendship between countries or permanent enmity. There are permanent interests. And if you can converge these two interests, so you use it to the benefit of both sides.
A fighter jet was brought down by Turkish army, and the Russian ambassador, the former one, was assassinated in Turkey. Despite all these tragedies, these two governments, Turkey and Russia, were able to get so close to each other, to the surprise of so many who followed the process, the rapprochement itself. Now, what is the basis for you to forge the close partnership?
Actually, I think Turkey and Russia were able to achieve these good results by being able to compartmentalize their relations. Compartmentalize, I use this word in the sense that if there is something that goes wrong in one area, we should not use this wrong thing in order to smash the good relations in other areas. So the good relations and the convergence of interest in one area should be kept, and they should be capitalized on. And if it is compartmentalized in an area where the relations are not good, they should remain within that context. It should not affect negatively the good relations in the other areas. So Turkey and Russia were able to achieve this compartmentalization, and this is success, and they should be congratulated for that.
Very quickly, do you think such special partnership between Moscow and Ankara will be able to help find a peaceful solution to the civil war in Syria? Very quickly.
There again, it depends which part of the Syrian question is a very complex issue. There are clashing interests with Russia and converging interests with Russia. Turkey and Russia should cooperate in the areas where their interests are converging, and in other areas they should agree to disagree.
Of course, that's a pretty wise approach based on very tough calculation of Turkey's national interests. Let me go back to the issue of the death penalty, which is one of the criteria for whether Turkey should be eventually accepted by the European Union. Now, this has a lot to do, I believe, with the house cleaning campaign following the coup. Do you believe the sweeping presidential power that President Erdogan has won through the referendum could be abused, quote unquote, to punish his political rivals domestically? Or do you believe a serious process of national reconciliation would be introduced, rather, to avoid causing more rivalry between the ruling party and the opposition, which accounted for about 48%. That's a huge amount that threatened to divide the whole country, that waits to be modernized, to be regarded and respected seriously by the rest of the world. So what do you think of the issue of the death penalty? Do you think there could be a process of national reconciliation?
I think that President Erdogan has taken the big lesson from the last coup against him. Mm-hmm. So I think without death penalty, he cannot achieve what he is planning to do. And I think that the nature of every regime is to survive. Mm-hmm. I think to survive is the central question of every regime. The same thing for President Erdogan. So to have resume all the death penalty, which is not accepted in the European Union, but I think President Erdogan will use death penalty as a tool to consolidate his position inside Turkey.
What's your argument about the death penalty and the house cleaning campaign?
I am against the death penalty because in the past, when I was studying in university, the professors gave us the example of several cases in the history where a person who was put into death penalty, later on it turned out, after he was executed, it turned out that it was wrong. I mean, another person. This is one of the reasons why I am against. And secondly, it's an atrocious way of punishing people. But regarding what His Excellency said, there is something which says that in the legal system, general natural law, which says that retroactive implementation of death penalty is not possible. In other words, when you commit a crime, if this crime was not passible of death penalty, you cannot change the law and make this act as punishable to death penalty and punish it. It's not possible. So you can punish only the people who will commit such crimes in the future. So for those who were involved in this failed coup, they cannot be put in death penalty, one thing. Secondly, Turkey has become party to the European Convention of Human Rights, which abolishes death penalty.
Thank you so much. With that, we've come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. The abolition of the death penalty is indeed viewed far and wide by the Europeans as a test of the sincerity of Turkish politicians, whether they are willing and ready to join the European Union or not. This is one of the criteria. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.